Today we're talking about Neon, which is a serverless Postgres database, super lightning fast and very cool features. Today with me is joining Mahmoud from the Neon team, which is going to walk us through the implementation of this database in the context of a Next.js app. But before we get there, thank you, Mahmoud, for joining me on the channel.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
To kick things off before we get into Neon, why don't you give us a background about yourself for folks who are not familiar with your work? I first came across your work, I guess it was in Next.js Conf. You were talking back then about Prisma and building an app with it. That's the first time I came across your content. But for folks who don't know you, let us know your journey into web dev and working with Neon now, and then we'll get started with Neon.
Awesome. Yeah. So I've been a software engineer for a couple of years now, maybe like almost 5 or something. I started out as a front engineer. I got paid for it, got really good at it. I loved it. But at some point, I kind of had the opportunity to create content, and I kind of started doing it a little bit on my own. And then I had an opportunity, and it was Prisma, and they were like, hey, they were looking for someone to do this developer advocacy thing. And I was like, okay, let's see what it's all about. And I tried it out. I really liked it. So I worked at Prisma for a little over a year and a half. And I had a fantastic time there. Did some of my best work there. And yeah, I've been a developer advocate for a couple of years now. And right now, I work as a developer advocate at Neon. So when it comes to my journey, I started out kind of first as a front-end developer. So using all of the front-end frameworks, writing CSS, making things look super polished and make them more fast. And then I started kind of transitioning down the stack where it comes to building APIs, working with databases more and more. And that's kind of my journey. So, one framework that I used a lot over the years was Next.js. I spoke at Next.js Conf like 3 times. And every time I would talk about something, mostly about how I built something with Next.js. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. I've used it since the Pages Day. I've used it with the app router and tried out the latest stuff. And yeah, I think it's cool.
Yeah, it's nice to hear your journey from moving from the front end all the way to the back end now, working with databases and Prisma specifically as an ORM, which is more like a full stack or a back end role. I mean, these days the line between front end and back end is just not as clear or as distinct as it was before. As a front end developer, you are really like a product engineer where you would just build APIs, connect to databases, also build UIs. So it's a mix of the two, I guess. And with tech like Neon and more cool stuff that is kind of coming up to the surface every day, it makes our jobs easier to kind of dabble into the backend, to the database, to the full stack kind of role of product engineering. Whereas before, I guess it was so much harder that somebody need to be specialized in the backend stuff, provisioning databases, writing servers and creating API interfaces. But now it's just so easy, and that's actually a good transition for Neon because I have heard about Neon a lot, but having used it in any project myself, we had a short talk together, and you showed me it was, yeah, exactly. It was pretty fast, and it was pretty interesting how easy it is making it, provisioning a Postgres site. It's just a connection string, or as you said it, a database as a URL. It's just an endpoint that you can call, and it's going to be taken care of in terms of auto scaling and whatnot. We're going to dive into the features more, but I will let you take the lead on introducing the database and how we would go about implementing it in Next.js, because that's mostly what my audience is interested about.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like you mentioned, Prisma is an ORM. So it's a tool for database access. You have your database where you're storing all of your data, and you're going to write queries to interact with this database. So doing create, read, update, and delete operations. And you do this when you're working with your APIs. And I'm happy to give you first a quick overview of Neon and kind of like the getting started experience. because ultimately all you're going to need is the connection string for you to connect to your database. And then Prisma is kind of like this, I don't know, do we assume that everyone knows what Prisma is? Or do we just give a little intro about it as well?
No, go ahead, give an intro as well. We have used it on the
Okay.
channel before, but for folks who don't know, it would be good to have your introduction from somebody who actually worked in Prisma. We would love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so one sec, let me share my screen, and let me go to Prisma's website. Okay, you can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So Prisma, I would say it was a tool that made working with databases really easy. It is a TypeScript ORM. So if you're using TypeScript, you're going to get type safety when you're accessing the database. So this means every time you write your query, well, you can be sure that you're not going to, let's say, pass the wrong type. And the cool thing is Prisma kind of has like three components. You can think of it as a database toolkit in a way. And the ORM itself, they have Prisma Client. So Prisma Client is an auto-generated type-safe query builder. And the cool thing is it abstracts SQL. So for example, here, this code snippet, if let's say you have a user stable, well, you can just say prisma.user.findUnique where and then their email. So you can pretty much guess that what this query is doing is actually finding a user by their email. And here we're also like, let's say, including their posts. So it just reads very well. You think in terms of objects, not SQL. And this ease of use made it become really, really popular. And the developer experience is really, really awesome. So yeah, like you have also other tools. So it's not just about the ORM itself. You also have both a like schema migrations tool, so Prisma Migrate, and I think actually the docs would be a better place to show things. So if I go to Quick Start, you'll notice that you have Prisma Migrate. So this is their schema migrations tool. So again, you don't have to write migrations by hand. When it comes to defining your tables, they just automatically generate it for you, and it just works, which is great. And then there's also Prisma Studio, which you can think of it as a data browser. So you can view the data that's inside your database. So I don't know, here it shows it. Maybe we'll need to like look it up. So Prisma Studio, and pretty much this is kind of what it looks like. You can view all the different tables, and you can query all the data, do some filtering, delete data manually if you want, which is really, really convenient. So this is like a, I don't know, couple of minutes crash course in Prisma. Pretty sure there are other videos. Maybe we can link to them down below for you to check out. But yeah, and the thing is, to get started with Prisma, you're going to need a connection string. And that's where Neon comes in. So Neon is managed Postgres. So Prisma supports multiple databases, and Postgres is one of them. So from us, all we need to do is go to neon.tech. You can sign up for free, and you have a. Is there noise on from my end? Is it picking up or no? No? Okay, cool. Well, okay. So, man, do I have to redo this part, or I don't know? It's up to you. I can't hear, by the way. You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So no, you can just go back to that page that you were on, that you said you can go to neon.tech and continue from there.
Well, let's say I'll log out. You can see it and go home. And okay. So to get started with Neon, all you need to do is go to neon.tech, and you can sign up for free, and you get a free Postgres database that you can use for your projects or to try out the platform. So for me, I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. And let me log in with GitHub. And right now, this is the Neon console. So I don't have any projects right now. I have a project that is shared with me. So this is also something you can do. But a project, you can think of it on Neon as really just a container for the different resources you can provision. So let's say we're going to call this project, what should we call it? We call it, I don't know, Next.js demo, for example. And you can then choose the Postgres version you want to use. pretty like you should just use the latest version, and then you should choose the region for your project. So where the resources will actually be deployed, and you should choose the region that is closest to where your app is deployed. Now, I know here on your channel, Next.js is super popular. So if developers are deploying to, let's say, to a service like Vercel, you can actually choose where the serverless functions are located. So if you're aware of the location of these functions, then you should choose the closest neon region that's available. So maybe the default, I think, is US East 1.
East, yeah.
So you can just pick US East, which is North Virginia, and then you can create a project. Now, when you create a project, it's done, and you can see it was like the database's compute started in like 0.1 seconds, and you have the connection string, and ultimately this is what you need. So the connection string here is really all you need, and we actually have in our quick start here, there's a Prisma example. So all you need to do really is you're going to have a .env file in your project, and here you're going to have the database URL. And then in your schema.prisma file, so this is the file where you actually define the different tables for your database, and you're going to be importing this database URL environment variable. So that's kind of pretty much it when it comes to the getting started experience. You saw how fast it is to provision a Postgres database, and if you're already familiar with Prisma, then you'll feel like, hey, this is very cool.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we also have a video on the channel coming up where we will talk about the best practices of implementing Prisma in Next.js, how you would set it up. So if you want to get kind of comfortable with Prisma side of thing and how you would set it up, you can watch that video. The link is in the description. But as far as what we need from Prisma on or after Prisma is the connection string that is really the connection to our database, in this case being Neon as a database.
Yep, exactly. So this is kind of all you need. And now the typical workflow with Prisma is, so I have this project here, and we can actually, let's say, clone it, and if we want, or I don't know. I think we can give a quick overview because I'm not really going to make a ton of changes. But this project really is a very simple Node.js API using TypeScript. It's literally a single file and is built using Fastify, and it just has a single API endpoint that returns like users from a database.
Users.
So yeah, now when it comes to the actually, I think I noticed a mistake. I think here I just added the Prisma stuff, but I haven't updated the query here. This is actually, it was using Drizzle. So this is the Drizzle syntax. We can talk about which one to choose if you want.
Yeah.
But should I cover that?
Yeah, of course. That's actually a question that I often get when working with ORMs. I know Drizzle is a newcomer to the game, but I actually want to also get your take of choosing between the two, or which one should you use when you're thinking of working with Prisma, with any database.
Yeah. So honestly, I think it kind of depends on what you need. So Drizzle is newer. Prisma has been around for a little while compared to Drizzle. But the cool thing about Drizzle is it kind of takes a different approach to working with databases with TypeScript. So they essentially don't abstract SQL at all. They give you a kind of SQL-like API that you use. And this is, let's say, one example. Let's take a look at, I don't know, a query. And actually, no, let's see the select. So if you want to do a select and you're familiar with SQL, Drizzle will feel really, really natural. Like they define their tables using TypeScript. In the case of Prisma, you use the schema.prisma file, so the Prisma schema definition language, which is, again, it's like friendlier. It's an abstraction over SQL. So it's a little bit easier if you're completely new to databases. But then when you're querying, well, you do like db.select.from users. This is how you would write SQL, which is, let's say, select star from users. And some people, like some developers, they really prefer kind of working with this sort of syntax. Drizzle also has like a Prisma-like querying API, So you can still do something similar where you do db.query.users.findMany. It's very similar, but this is only for reads. If you want to do any sort of, let's say, updates, you want to insert data, you want to delete data, then you still need to know, let's say, more SQL, and the API is a little bit different. So ultimately, I would say both tools are kind of close in terms of like what they offer. Drizzle has Drizzle Studio, so it also has its own data browser, and it has Drizzle Kit, which is its own schema migration tool. So like when you look at them, you'll find that they're both very similar. So I would say pick whatever you like. I think one advantage is with Drizzle is if you already know SQL, you'll feel very comfortable. But the thing is, even with Prisma, they have Prisma client extensions, so you can easily pair Prisma with, let's say, a query builder like Keysly, and it still works. So it's very hard. I would say just pick whatever you're most comfortable with. The added advantage when it comes to Prisma is that it abstracts away anything, like everything related to kind of the database, and it gives you kind of like this, I would say, very friendly experience in working with database, where you don't really have to think in SQL. You just think about, hey, this is the data that I want, the data that I need, and ultimately, I would say you pick whatever you're most comfortable with. So I would say you should absolutely try both of them. Just because I say, hey, choose this thing, don't just trust me for it. I'd say give it a shot, try it out, and then you'll be able to see which
Which one you like?
But
Yeah, but I also share the same kind of point here, that what I like about Prisma is that you would get used to using the API, the SDK, regardless of the database that is under the hood. So even if you're not using Postgres, if you're using it with MongoDB, it's still the same API that you're kind of writing. You don't have to learn the database's specific query language to be able to work. So that standard unification of no matter what database you're using for a specific project, that I like about that. And I think as you mentioned there, if you're already comfortable writing SQL, probably you would feel more at home with Drizzle out of the box because you're writing SQL. But on the Prisma side, also they have the Pulse, which is live database, I think connection or
I think
events.
about real time. If you want to do a real time feature, they make it easy for you to subscribe to changes in your database.
Yeah.
And you still have the same API. So I would say, yeah, Prisma as a tool is definitely expanding. They have Accelerate, which is kind of, I think, a connection pool as well as a global cache. And it's kind of smarter than you, let's say, writing your own caching logic. It will be able to kind of intelligently cache your data. So let's say you're querying the same thing over and over, well, it's going to return data from a cache, which is a lot faster. So I would say this is also, I would say, one difference with Prisma versus Drizzle is it kind of keeps adding more and more tools to the database experience.
Especially with the Prisma Accelerate or the connection pooling, because that's a common problem when you are deploying your Next.js apps and your API endpoints at serverless functions. At some point, you just run out of connections. So connection pooling is something that might be interesting for folks trying to decide between the two. I know Neon takes a different approach in that it provides its own connection pooling. So in the case of working with Neon, you don't have to worry about this. But generally speaking, it's nice that Prisma also has more stuff other than just the ORM. So
yep, exactly. So like here, I'm on the Neon console, and you have the regular connection string, and then you have a pooled connection, and that has like a dash pooler flag here. And okay, whenever you actually copy, the the password actually becomes visible. So I'm gonna have to reset this.
yes.
And just in case I don't want it to leak. But now this is the new password, so it's fine.
Yeah.
To be cool. But yeah, so you have a pooler flag, and this is the pool connection, and it supports up to 10,000 simultaneous connections. So you don't have to worry about running out of connections when you're working with Neon in the context of serverless.
I see. So when we are using it with Prisma, is this the connection string, the pooled connection string that we would copy to our .env to work with Prisma?
Yep, exactly.
Awesome.
So
okay.
here I have the Prisma file, and here it's the same. You can
Got it.
use both, and the cool thing is, it just works. You don't have to worry about anything else. We've worked closely with the Prisma team a lot to make the experience super, super smooth. And yeah, it's a long story. There were like tons of little annoyances that you had to do to make things work, but now just have a connection string, works everywhere, and you don't have to worry about it. So,
You're the connecting chain between Prisma and Neon
I
guys.
kind of yeah, I would say. I mean, yeah, we have like we always just chat with them a lot and make sure that Prisma users have a really good time when they're using Neon with Prisma. So yeah.
Awesome. So what else?
Okay, what else? So now we actually have the connection string. We have kind of okay. We went through the experience of creating a project on Neon. We have the connection string, and now I think it'd be cool to just walk through what a typical workflow would look like when you're working with Prisma. And the idea is really kind of you have, let's say, three stages. You have your development, you have your preview, especially if you have like preview deployments, and then you have your production environment. And the idea really is Prisma gives you Prisma Migrate as the tool to use from you know development to preview to production. And this code example I think would be helpful to understand. And here I have my Prisma folder. Inside it, I have my schema.prisma file. And in my schema.prisma file, here I'm defining my model, data model. So here I have a user model. So this will translate to a table in our database. And then here we're defining the different columns as well as their types. So we're saying that each user will have an ID, and this is the primary key of this table. And by default, it will auto increment. So every time we add a new record, this ID will, let's say, first be 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. And then each user has a name, an email, and the email has to be unique and has an is subscribed field, by the way. You should subscribe to the channel, And the default value here is, let's say, true. And then you have a password, it's a type string, and then you have a role. This is an enum, and this is, this role can either have one of two values, either a user or admin. And then we have like a created at and an updated at field. And the cool thing is the updated at field is just automatically updated whenever we update a record, which is really convenient. So yeah, that's kind of how you define your schema and the different tables. And so let's say you're starting from scratch. Typically, what you would do is you're going to have, let's say, your Next.js project, create next app, npm install -d Prisma, and then you're going to install Prisma client, and then you're going to define your data model by creating this schema.prisma file. And you're going to define your data model, and you're going to need a database. Now, you could technically use the connection string you get from Neon right away, but typically you use this connection string for production. So you need another connection string. So either you have a local Postgres installation that you have, maybe it's running using Docker, or you have, just you install it and you start like a Postgres server locally and you connect to it, or you can use Neon branches. So with Neon, you can kind of work with your data just like code. And if you go to the Neon console, I have this project and we have this connection string. And this connection string is, let's say you have it for your production environment. And if you need another kind of isolated copy of your data for you to work with, this includes with the schema and data, you can create a branch. And you can create a branch by just going to the branches page and then clicking on create branch. And here you can see that we have a single branch. It's called main. So this is actually the branch that has the connection string that we just saw. So we have by default, when you create a project, we have a branch that automatically gets created and it's called main. And this branch has its own connection string that you can use, and then you access the database. Now, a little Postgres thing. When I say database, I mean, let's say here the database is called NeonDB. But again, some people use the term database to just refer to, let's say, the entire Postgres cluster. So because in Postgres, you have the connection string you can actually create multiple databases. And each database, you can think of it as a folder. So when I say here your database, I'm just referring to a connection string. You have a database that you're working with, kind of just the simple stuff. But if you want, you can actually create other databases, and these would be different. But you don't actually have to worry about that because with Neon, you can just create branches. So if I go to the branches page, you see that I have my main branch, and this is the branch you would use for production. It has this primary label, and all you need to do is click create branch. And when you do, you can, of course, create the branch from the console, or you can create it using the CLI. And the cool thing is with, let's say we're going to create it here, and let's call it dev branch. But if you're working, let's say in a team setting and you have multiple people, you can, we recommend the naming convention of doing like dev slash, let's say, Mahmoud. So this would be my own branch that I use for development. And I'm going to just click create new branch. And here I'm just saying that I'm including all of the data that's in the parent branch, which is the main branch. So you can think of it similar to code where you have, let's say, your main Git repo, and then you want to create another branch, and this branch includes everything whenever you create that branch. So everything is copied.
Yeah.
And any change you make to that newly created branch doesn't actually affect the parent branch. So here, if I'm going to click create new branch, we have the connection string created instantly. And this connection string is actually different than the connection string for the main branch. So if I go back to the connection details widget here I'm displaying my connection string for the dev branch. You can notice this, host name EP little snow. And if I switch to the main branch, you'll notice that it's EP black unit. So it's just a different ID. So they're both completely isolated. Now, the thing is, if I actually had tables in this Neon project, then what will happen is all the tables will actually be copied in this new branch. But here we actually don't have any data. And you actually, in the console, you have a tables page that you can use to view the data that's inside your database. But here I'm on the main branch, no tables. And here I'm on the dev branch. Also, there shouldn't be any tables. I would have been surprised if there were tables, but there aren't. So yeah, that's kind of with branches how you can use them. And now you can use this connection string while developing locally. And what will happen is once you define your schema.prisma file, the next step is to actually generate the migrations for this, data model. So here we define the, let's say the different table. Here we have a single one, different tables, we have a single table, but the database doesn't actually understand Prisma schema definition language. So what happens is you need a step in between to generate the necessary SQL that the database understands so that we can actually create the tables. And that's where the migrations folder come in. So the migrations folder contains essentially all of the SQL queries that you would have had to write if you weren't using Prisma. And here I have a migration. It's a .sql file. And you'll notice that this is the actual SQL that gets generated from the Prisma schema we defined. So here you just have your create table user. We have all of the fields, all of the constraints, not null. And if, let's say, something has to be unique, and you can see here we have like a unique index, and we have also all the enums and everything. So to actually get to this step, what you would do is you use Prisma migrate. But the thing is, Prisma migrate offers multiple commands. So I actually want to bring up their docs. You have the getting started. So here you define the schema.prisma file. And the next step is to create the migration. And to do that, you're going to use the Prisma migrate dev command. And here you can pass a name for the migration. Now, what will happen once you run this command is it will actually generate the Prisma schema. It will generate for you the necessary migrations, so you don't have to write them by hand. And yeah, now Prisma offers a way to skip generating migrations, but we do not recommend that. And you'll see why, because this migrations folder plays a key role into evolving your database schema over time. So when you're working locally, you use the Prisma migrate dev command, and you use it to essentially generate the migrations that are in the migration folder. So let's say now you build your feature, you have your Next.js app, you added the UI, you added the API route, maybe you're using server components and you added all of the queries and you're using all of the latest stuff, and you're happy with your changes. Everything works fantastic on localhost, and now you want to get your database changes and then apply them to, let's say, another environment. So in your preview environment, you actually don't want to be using the same database you're using locally. You want to have another database that is different and is isolated. And essentially, you apply the same migrations that you wrote or that generated locally, and then you reapply them again to that new environment in the preview environment. And to do that, well, what will happen is you actually wouldn't use the Prisma migrate dev command because we actually now have a migrations folder. We're actually going to use another command, which is the Prisma migrate deploy. And here, let's actually search for it. And Prisma migrate deploy. And this command, the difference is you use this command whenever you want to actually apply the migrations to a staging or production environment. And the difference really is with Prisma Migrate Deploy, Prisma Migrate looks at your migration history, so all of the migrations that are in your migrations folder, and then just reapplies any pending migrations. So you can think of it this way. The database, let's say on Neon, has a certain schema, and you want to evolve this schema. Well, you're going to update your schema.prisma file, generate the necessary migrations, and then apply them to the database. So Prisma Migrate Deploy, all it does is it checks against like, hey, the migrations that I have in code, if let's say here, if I go back to the code and I go to here on this, in this folder, migrations, here I have a single migration. But if you're introducing a new change, you're going to have another folder that contains another migration. And Prisma Migrate will compare any changes made to this directory and compare it against the actual database. And if there are any kind of mismatch, then what it does is it applies the same migrations that are found in this folder. Am I explaining things clearly, or is this moving too fast? Is it fine?
Nope, that's
Okay,
perfect.
that's good.
Yeah. So the difference, just to summarize, is that migrate deploy compares your changes, updates that you have done locally to what you already have to the deployed version of the database, and then does that migration for you.
Pretty much. It just looks at whatever migrations are in the migrations folder under Prisma/migrations. And if the current connection string that you define, it checks against like, hey, we're going to go to that database, see what the current schema is. And if that schema is different than the schema defined using Prisma, then what will happen is it's going to apply any changes that are found in the schema.prisma file to the database. So you can think of it really as, let's say I want to go to galedraw.com and let's draw a diagram. And okay, we have this. Let's say now this is how you go from dev, let's make this bigger, and then you have preview, and then you have production. And the idea here is you're going to first write your schema.prisma file, and then you're going to, let's say, this, and then you're going to generate migrations, and then you actually have all of the migrations applied to, let's say, a Neon branch in this case, or a local Postgres instance, and these changes will be applied to your local database. And then what you want is you're going to commit your changes from dev to preview. So in this case, you're going to open a pull request. You're going to, let's say, push your changes to a new Git branch, and your local Git branch will be, let's say, available publicly. And what will happen is you're going to push your code, and your code is going to include the Prisma/migrations directory. And essentially what you want is either you have a dedicated CI/CD pipeline. In my example, I use GitHub Actions. I'll go over it. But you can technically do this also in your project's build step, like right before it. So let's say in Next.js, you do, I don't know, next build, I think. And before that, you can run the Prisma Migrate deploy command. And what will happen is before your project is deployed, you're going to Prisma Migrate will look at if there are any changes that are in this folder, and it's going to see the .env file, the connection string that's in it, and it's going to see, okay, if there are any changes between this environment and that environment. And the idea is you want to have different connection strings for the dev and the preview, and they're separate. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell how you go from dev to preview. But you'll notice something is that here it's against a Neon dev branch, or let's say a local Postgres instance. Well, you're going to want to do the same thing to the preview. So in a way, what you need to do now is actually just here first create another Neon branch and then apply any pending migrations. And you want this step because you have a preview, right? Unless you want to, I don't know, I guess push your changes to production right away. But let's say we're responsible. We're going to test our changes before shipping them to production. And you essentially want a preview environment where you can test these changes. And if you're, let's say, using something like Vercel, you get this out of the box. But the thing is, you have to somehow inject a Neon branch into this preview deployment workflow. So in my example, I actually am not using Vercel. I'm using fly.io, and I'm using GitHub Actions as my CI/CD pipeline. But if you're using Next.js with Vercel, well, they actually give you, like, it has its own built-in CI/CD pipeline, and it deploys stuff for you, manages secrets for you, and it does all these things for you. So technically, you could, use Vercel with GitHub Actions, but why? It's, unless you need it, you'll do it. But you can get away with just running, let's say, the Prisma migrate deploy command before your project builds up. But now, how do you get the Neon branch into Vercel? Well, you can actually use the Neon integration on Vercel. So I actually have an integration. And actually, let me show it from the Neon console, it'll be easier. So if you go to the integration stage, you actually have a Vercel integration. And this integration creates a database branch for every Vercel preview deployment. And all you need to do really is just you click add, you add from Vercel, you go to add integration, you select whatever project you want to add. Let's say I'm going to use this one. I'm going to make the integration have access to all of my Vercel projects. I'll click install. I'll be redirected to Neon. And then I'll choose which Vercel project I have. So I actually have a project here called Prisma Vercel Neon that's on Vercel. And I can click continue. And here I'm choosing my Neon project, so the Next.js demo. And now you can see that I can create a branch for the development environment. So I don't need this, I already have this. But then you can see that it also deletes obsolete Neon branches. So once a PR is merged, the Neon branch will automatically be deleted for you. You don't have to worry about that. But once you actually click continue and you connect, what will happen is the Neon integration will set these environment variables for you. So these are your production environment variables. So you have the database URL. This is the pooled version. And then you have the unpooled version if you want to for some reason. You could be using, let's say, I don't know, specific features that are available only with the unpooled version. But yeah, you just click connect. And that's really it. You don't have to manually copy the connection string, add it to Vercel. And at the same time, every time you open a pull request with Vercel, then you're going to have a Neon branch created for you. So if I go back to actually the diagram, you can think of it as here you have a Neon dev branch, and here you have a Neon preview branch. And depending on how you want to create it, so you can create it from CI/CD pipeline, you can use the Vercel integration. It's really up to you and your setup. But let's say now we actually have our preview. Well, the final step is technically merging our code. And to merge our code, well, it's pretty much going to be the same process, because what will happen is in the pull request, it will have different migrations that are tested against the Neon branch. But once you merge, well, your production branch is not going to have the same schema that's found in code. So Prisma Migrate will just reapply the same migrations again. And now this folder it went on a little journey from dev to preview and then to production. And then here, all you need to do is really just apply any pending migrations against production. Or, in your case, in Neon's case, is the primary branch. So that's pretty much the workflow. And yeah, this is kind of how you go from dev to preview to production. That's why you should generate the migrations folder when you're using Neon with Prisma, because then you'll have this sort of workflow. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to automate this. And why would you? You can easily do it. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
So
I like this feature, and I want to just review what we have covered here.
yeah.
So the branches, what I am hearing and what I like about them is that instead of having to create, local Postgres instances and seed them with data or work with fake data, with this feature, you can easily work with your real data by taking a snapshot of your main branch, just creating a separate branch. And then if you are using Vercel with the integration for every deployment or if for every preview deployment that you have, there's going to automatically be a URL or a connection string generated for you and a new branch for that preview deployment, which is going to be killed and terminated after you merge it back into production, which is great. So therefore, throughout your workflow of local development, testing, production, staging, and deployment, you have been working with your real database, but not on the same branch to worry about, mutating data in the main branch. But this workflow is actually really nice, and it was very easy to create these branches.
Yep.
We will probably have another follow-up video in actually showing these steps that you beautifully visualized for us in this diagram to put it in Next.js and walk through that kind of process of working locally and then going to preview and then going push to production to actually also see it in action.
Yep.
But that was a cool thing. Now, something you mentioned there, we covered the connection pooling, and that's automatically generated with Neon.
Yep.
As we are talking about our server components and API endpoints, fetching the data or writing to our database in serverless environments. So we don't have the problem of connection pooling, but I also read that it's edge ready in that we can talk to the database over HTTP or make without needing to have a TCP connection in the edge runtime if you are deciding to do anything with the database in your middleware, which is deployed as an edge function, or even in your server components, you can now choose to deploy them as edge. So why don't we cover that part as well?
Yeah, for sure. So just to give a little bit of context, when it comes to Postgres connections, what happens is you need to be able to establish a kind of a connection over TCP. And serverless environments, specifically edge, runtime, it actually doesn't support connecting to the database over TCP. You actually need to use HTTP. Now, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but that's kind of like how it works. Is if you wanted to, let's say, connect to your database, write your queries in your, let's say, middleware or an edge function, it just wouldn't work. So the workaround was Neon introduced its own serverless driver. So this is a driver for Postgres that allows you to query your database from those environments. And then you can actually visit it by going to github.com/neondatabase/serverless. And it's actually, it's just an NPM package. I think, actually, I want to check how many downloads it has. It's like, 100K downloads. So it's used. And yeah, the way it works really is it's just like any kind of Postgres driver. And you just use it to query your database from those environments. And the cool thing is, it's like there are actually kind of two modes for the serverless driver. One allows you to write queries over HTTP, and one establishes connections over WebSockets. And I would say, like, you don't have to dive too deep. The difference really is are you using specific Postgres features that require, let's say, a kind of a regular Postgres connection? If that's the case, then you should use the WebSockets version. Otherwise, you should use the HTTP version, which is also slightly faster. So really, this is how you do it. You just import Neon from the serverless driver, and then you establish a connection by importing the database URL, and then you just write your queries. Now, the cool thing is, actually, Prisma has an adapter for the serverless driver. So if you go to, I haven't tested it when it comes to actually using Prisma in edge functions before, but I believe it should work. Let's say we go to the ORM, we go to quick start, and we go to search, and we go to serverless driver adapter. So here with the serverless driver adapter is you actually use the Neon serverless driver instead of using Prisma's built-in Postgres driver. And this way, you actually can connect over HTTP or WebSockets in place of TCP. So that's really kind of the benefit and why you would need to do this. But ultimately, with this serverless driver, you just work with your database normally from those runtimes where it might not be supported to query your database directly. But the thing is, it's a little bit tricky because those runtimes have actually evolved over time. And pretty sure, like let's say an environment like Cloudflare Workers is also it also already introduced like being able to establish TCP connection. It just wasn't there when, let's say, a couple of months back when we wanted to introduce the serverless driver. But yeah, plus we also just have a bunch of optimizations for the driver so that actually it works faster and you can connect faster to your database. So yeah, if you're using Prisma, you can use the serverless driver with it, and it just works. So here, this example shows the version over WebSockets, but also it should work when you're using the HTTP version. So this was a quick overview.
Beautiful. Now, I also want to mention this. When we're talking about the edge runtime, really, the idea was to use the edge compute to be closer to the users. Now, you touched on it in the beginning of when we was creating the database itself, and we were selecting the region. With the new stuff, the caching and the partial pre-rendering that's coming to Next.js, we've recently talked about this with the new versions of Next.js. The need for running your functions on the edge is not as much as you needed it before, or it was pushed before, because if you are deploying as serverless functions, considering that your database is close to where your code is deployed, instead of having that latency of your compute running close to your users and then having to go back to your database, as Mahmoud mentioned, is better to be closer to where your servers are deployed. But then with the use of partial pre-rendering, which is going to serve a static shell or static parts of your site on a page per basis, and then only wait for or suspense on the dynamic parts, you're going to get a faster result anyway. So you don't need necessarily to use the edge runtime, which came with its own limitations. One being not able to create TCP connections for databases and the need for this connection over HTTP. A little side note, what's coming down in the future in Next.js as far as partial pre-rendering, and that maybe we don't need to use Edge for compute. We can still use Edge for config, for our middlewares, but not necessarily for server components or data fetching as we were using before.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really a problem is you can run code closer to the user, but the data isn't close to the user. So let's say, for example, I don't know, let me try here to illustrate this. Let's say this is the globe, right? And imagine that, I don't know, this dot here, imagine this is, let's say, I don't know, the US, and this is like US East 1, for example. I don't have a globe here, but what happens is, let's say you have a request from a user that is, let's say, I don't know, in Europe. Let's say that this is Europe somehow. Well, if your functions and the database is running there, well, the request, I believe, will go there, and then it will just go back to the user. Because if the function is here, and also, let's say, actually, let's have maybe a bit of colors. Let's say this is neon and it's green, and you have this, let's say it's your function. Well, you're going to call the function, and the function will talk to the database. But the thing is, if you're using an edge function, well, the location here is not static, right? Like the location will be in another place. Let's say it's close to the user. So let's say it's here. This is the closest edge location. So now what will happen is the request will go, I believe, to the closest region. Let's say I make this slide again, and then go to the database, which is still in the same location. And then the response comes from, I don't know if this is a good explanation, if I'm making things more confusing to people, but then there, like, you just have an extra network hop that, like, the distance traveled is actually a little bit bigger than
Yeah.
if you just, spoken directly.
It kind of defeats the purpose of having that edge being closer to the user because your compute has to go all the way back to your database and then bring the data back. So,
Pretty much.
yeah.
So that's kind of like the issue where you're going to have to do this and then you have to do that, which is just kind of an extra, like the distance and the time will potentially end up being longer than if you just made the request directly and didn't just stop with response. So that's kind of why the edge, while it does, let's say that in the case of, let's say, config, you don't fetch the data from the database. It's actually kind of like cached globally, right? So that's why it will always be fast. But if you actually have the data that's in the database, well, it gets tricky. But let's say it was things like global caching. Let's say in the case of Prisma, they have Prisma Accelerate. They actually cache your data, I believe, across multiple locations. So then you wouldn't actually query the database all the time. You would just, let's say, run something like this. Like, this is close to me. This is where I am. This is where my data is. I'd just be querying it and getting it back.
From the
So
cache. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of so, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Beautiful. So I think this was a pretty comprehensive introduction to Neon and a lot of concepts here from Prisma as an ORM, your schemas, migrations, Neon as a database, and also deployment workflows
Yeah.
that we had here. Anything else that you think you might want to add?
I mean, one thing I actually haven't shown is what the code looks like if you're using something like GitHub Actions. So in this example, what happens is this is all nicely abstracted when you're using something like Vercel. But with GitHub Actions, in case you're unfamiliar, it's a way for you to build a CI/CD pipeline. So GitHub allows you to listen on different events. Let's say you create a pull request, you push code to production, so to the main branch. Well, you can run different CI/CD workflows, and you do it using YAML, which is, I hate YAML, but it is what it is. And for example, I have a deploy preview workflow here, and what this does, this might look scary, but it's not. What happens is we're just getting, like, we're gonna, setting up the GitHub action, installing dependencies, then we get the Git branch name. So if, let's say, you have a Git branch name called, let's say, feed/add navbar, for example, then this will be the name of this branch, and we're going to use it to name the Neon branch. So in this step, you just create a Neon branch. This uses a Neon provided GitHub action. And then here I'm naming my branch to be preview/PR and then the PR number, and then the name of the Git branch. So imagine that once I open a pull request, I'll have a Neon branch that uses the same name as the Git branch. And we actually do this so that when the pull request closes, we actually delete it for you. And yeah, once we have a Neon branch, we run migrations. And to do that, we use Prisma Migrate Deploy. And then I just deploy my app. Here it's using Fly, but you can technically swap this out with Vercel. Actually, I have an example using Vercel as well in CI. But again, the integration is just super nice. But if you're using GitHub Actions with Vercel, you just have a deploy step to Vercel. Plus, like, you also need to build your project before. And then we comment on the pull request, and the comment really is for the preview deployment URL. So all of this configuration code, you get it once you're using Vercel. It just works when you sign up for them, which is, again, super, super convenient. But yeah, with the integration, you get a similar workflow. And yeah, like, the difference is if Vercel is your CI/CD pipeline, then you need to run a script before you actually deploy. And that's why I mentioned modifying the build command. It's not just next build. No, you do, let's say, Prisma migrate deploy ampersand, and then you do the next build.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then same thing for production. Again, scary. Hey, it's not fun. But then you just run the Prisma migrate deploy before you actually deploy your app. And again, it's all the same concepts. It's just different tooling. but the flow that I showed you with the diagram, pretty much it's the same. And even if you're using Drizzle, it's going to be the same workflow. The difference is you'll just use, let's say, Drizzle for writing your queries and business logic, Drizzle Kit for generating migrations, and yeah, and applying them as well. So yeah.
I think we had a pretty comprehensive overview of working with Neon as a serverless Postgres, Prisma as a way to connect and query our database. We talked about branches, preview deployments, and also serverless and edge runtime connecting to your database or querying your database over HTTP. So thank you, Mahmoud, for walking us through that. We're going to have more videos coming up on the channel where we would implement Neon as a part of our Next.js app. So we're going to build with it. We're going to set up Prisma. We're going to connect and query our database. We can maybe try different runtimes such as the serverless and edge. And hopefully we'll have Mahmoud another time for a second part or a follow-up on this conversation again on the channel now that we had him here once. So thank you, Mahmoud, for taking us through this.
No problem. It's my pleasure. I really wanted to just give you, like your audience, kind of just a high-level overview of the different pieces, how they fit together, and focus on that. Because I don't know, we haven't really covered Prisma in depth. We haven't written any queries. We haven't, had a UI with, let's say doing querying, doing mutations and things like that. And I wanted really the scope to be focused on the workflow and how you use, let's say, Prisma when you're building with Next.js, because you could see all of the, let's say, steps, but then let's say maybe a video doesn't cover how do you go from preview to production. It just covers like, oh, how to build the app. And I wanted to, I don't know, fill those gaps because these are gaps that I had at some point when I was starting out. I was like, okay, I get it. I have the database, I'm connected, but then what about the rest of the stuff?
Yeah.
How does that work? And the cool thing is like actually all of the, like everything mentioned, it's actually highlighted in the Prisma documentation. Like I can share my screen and show you. So if you go to prisma.io and then it's okay, ORM, quick start, and go to the docs. And let's say now we go to Prisma migrate and let's say workflow, I think. Yeah. So here it actually covers everything that I covered. So this is the best practices. So you make local changes to your schema, you do migrate dev, you push your changes to a repo, and then, but again, this is also not in a complete, like this is also an overview. So hopefully by giving you a little bit more info, you can see kind of the complete picture and how you can build your app. And especially if you want to use Prisma, it makes things super easy. Docs are great. You have everything pretty much covered. And yeah, you can ask them questions as well. The community is super responsive. So that's why I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I learned a ton, Mahmoud, and I like the approach you took in that we took it beyond building a simple app and fetching data from Neon database. Now we know from a high level every step of the way, or what we need to do from development to preview to production, the things we have at our disposal, such as branches, the edge-ready runtime, the SDK for using in serverless functions or querying our database on HTTP. I feel like every segment of our conversation now deserves a dedicated video, maybe diving deeper into showing it in more details. But that was a very nice overview. I personally learned a ton. Maybe we will bring you for a second part to maybe dive deeper into that or build a project and then actually see these steps in action. And besides that, we're going to have more videos on the channel, projects or dedicated videos just talking about Neon features or how to implement it really in Next.js in future. So thank you again, Mahmoud, for joining us. We're going to count on you as our connection in Neon for any questions that we might have and support the community here.
Yeah, for sure. We actually have a Discord you can join. So go to like neon.tech/Discord and you can ask questions there. I hang out there all the time. And yeah, we actually get a lot of Prisma users asking questions. So feel free to join there, ask questions, and pretty sure you'll get some help. So,
awesome. So that's a wrap for this video, folks. If you have any questions, like always, hit me up in the comments and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.